Hello, I'm Liam Fogarty. Liverpool's Bar of the Year doesn't sell any alcohol. It's called The Brink. It's in Parr Street, and one of the people who helped to set it up is my guest today. She's also about to officially launch a new venture in the city, a treatment centre for ex-service personnel who have their own issues with addiction. You can see there's a bit of a theme here. So let's ask Jacquie Johnston-Lynch what it's all about. Jacquie, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Let's talk about Brink first of all. That's been a fixture of the Liverpool scene for a couple of years. How surprised were you that you were deemed to be Liverpool's official Bar of the Year?
I think it's just fantastic. I think when I dreamed the idea up, that was always a hope that we would become really mainstream, and actually that the mainstream public would love us so much that one day we might win an award for being the best bar. But in Liverpool, you'd never think that the bar with no booze would actually win that award, would you? But we did.
And it's a social enterprise. There's a kind of social purpose behind it. Just explain what the philosophy behind Brink was.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a social enterprise. And what it's based on being a commercial venue. So as you walk in, to all intents and purposes, it's a commercial venue. And then there's some doors at the back where services are offered. And so any commercial profits are ploughed directly into paying for people's drug and alcohol treatment.
And what's the kind of public response been like?
Public response has been amazing, particularly when we had the Duchess of Cambridge come to do her visit. She did her very first ever solo public visit, and Parr Street was kind of mobbed by CNN and Sky and all of that kind of crew.
How did you manage to swing that?
Well, I wish I could say that I did that, but that was absolutely not on my part. So it was people who were at the top end of the charity who'd made links with the royal family, and the Duchess was actually asked to choose 5 particular charities, and she chose 4 very easily. And the last one, she wanted something to be a little bit different, a little bit edgy, and she had a connection with the charity, and she met with the charity and decided that actually she wanted to come and visit the Brink and see what we did. So she became our patron and did a very famous official visit to us.
Can I ask how Brink selects the people who work there? Because you are supporting people who've had some real rough times and who have issues with drink and maybe drugs as well. How they come to you? How do you say, yeah, we can help you? Or how do you say, sorry, no can do?
Well, there's 2 lots of people. There's people who work there in kind of a commercial sense, in the front of house, in the kitchens, and then there's people who work there delivering direct drug and alcohol service, so substance misuse type treatment services. And most of them are either in recovery themselves or have been directly affected by addiction at some point, so they've had a loved one or a family member affected by that. And what we tried to do in the beginning was to create a workforce there that was 75% in recovery. And at the time, HR was saying, oh, I'm not sure we'd be able to do that. And we went, well, let's have a go, let's see if we can. And actually the people who interviewed who were in recovery were not people who were experienced, because some of them had spent long periods of time in jail or unemployed for long periods because they had a severe addiction problem, really. So they didn't have much work experience, but they had skills. They had very, very clear skills that were transferable. And so what we did was we kind of took those people on, and they've gone on to really be massive successes there. They've completely changed their life around and are excellent workers. People in recovery never ring in with a hangover. They've got a conscience, so they never steal anything out their till. They're absolutely amazing staff.
You've kind of moved on a bit from Brink. You're still associated with the enterprise, but your focus these days is on Tom Harrison House. Now, first of all, tell us who Tom Harrison was.
So Tom Harrison is the grandfather of the founder of Tom Harrison House. So my colleague Paula, we developed the charity together, but it was her who had the original idea. And the reason being is that she's now 17 years in recovery, so she's completely turned her life around. But when she was in her active addiction, it would be her granddad who she'd go and see. So she'd be at her wit's end, and she would go and speak to him and say to him, tell me stories about when you're in the Navy. So this man, he was on the HMS Valiant, he was mentioned in dispatches, so he would tell her lots of war stories, and he loved telling her all stories about the Navy. And for her, it gave her periods of time when she wasn't using and drinking. So it gave her kind of free space from going out to use substances. And she always wanted to honour him in some way. So she had the idea, let's help military veterans who are addicted, and let's name the place after my granddad.
Well, you know a lot about this field, and so to a degree do I. And actually, grandparents play an enormous role, don't they, in recovery? Because quite often, if someone has a problem, the parents don't want to know, so they skip a generation. So it's interesting that that theme is It's
Yeah.
played out in your new venture.
Yeah.
What facilities does Tom Harrison House offer?
So we're what's called a quasi-residential treatment centre. So we have one centre where we deliver the treatment from, and then we have two separate houses where the men who are currently with us, they live there. And sometimes people, if they're robust enough to stay at home, so if they've got good family support, often, you know, partners, mums and dads, if they've got children at home, and they can, sometimes we'll let them stay at home and come into us on a daily basis. So it's quasi-residential, and what we offer is something that is quite new really in the field. Is we're not doing lots and lots of clinical treatment, because this particular client group, men, particularly men from the forces who are veterans, they often have other co-occurring disorders, so they have severe mental health problems in some cases. And what we don't want to do is what mainstream treatment centres do, and is that sometimes run clinical services that are actually quite triggering and are doing a lot of digging and archaeological digs in people's pasts. And really what we want to do is to support them to change their life, to learn. So we do lots of psychoeducation. We give them lots of support and structure like the armed forces did. So they do a lot of PT. So they like their physical training, they like their health and nutrition. They also do something called equine therapy. In fact, today that's where they all are now, at equine therapy. So they go out to a pony sanctuary called Shilohan. It's out in Thornton, and they work there with the ponies. And it's a really good way of them being able to kind of externalise their feelings. So a lot of the men don't want to talk about themselves, but they'll talk about their ponies and then join up the dots that their feelings are similar to the horses.
I mean, it sounds a tremendous range of things that you offer there. But you have to ask, given the amount that we spend as a country on defence, given the amount that the public actually raises for veterans and causes like Help for Heroes and so on, how come you're having to kind of scratch around to get this pioneering scheme off the ground?
Yeah, it's a really difficult subject, this, I think, because these veterans are often homeless and addicted. We're the bottom of the pile. So there are lots of other military charities that will bring in lots of money and do really fantastic work. But we seem to be like the complete Cinderella service of them all. So it's very difficult for us to find money. And I think there's a question of blame that kind of circles around this, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and a lot of blame. It's a bit like, I think, the Ministry of Defence and the government are thinking, oh, because the culture in the armed forces is work hard, play hard, so there's lots of drinking that goes on, we don't want to have to take responsibility for this. So we wouldn't be funding it in any way, shape or form.
So, but the people you see, do they have these issues when they leave, or do they develop addictions and problems after they've left, when perhaps, as you say, there's a kind of a vacuum in their lives?
Well, in many ways, it's on three levels. Some will have had the issue before they went in, and some will have developed it while they're in, and some will have developed it while they come out. And in some cases, all three happens because they had it when they went in, what they saw in the armed forces and the way in which the culture is in the armed forces then exacerbated their drinking. And then when they came out, their transition was difficult, and that then just escalated their drinking even more. So we don't want to get into that culture of blame. We absolutely don't want to. We're saying we don't think anybody can be responsible for this. You know, if it was either there or it wasn't there. Some of the situations that people were placed in may well have exacerbated the kind of drinking culture. But nonetheless, we don't want to take part in the blame game. So what we're saying is, let's have a look at whether military-specific treatment centres work like they do in America. And if they do, and we're independently evaluated, then we'd like to see a funding stream attached to that.
You mentioned America. You're about to head off to the States on a fact-finding tour, and you'll meet US veterans. Do the Americans do it better than we do?
I tend to think, and this isn't because I'm married to an American, but I do tend to think that Americans are doing a better job now looking after their veterans and also their reservists. And I think that's because they had a Vietnam and we kind of didn't really have a Vietnam. They learnt lots of lessons from that conflict. And there were lots of homelessness, lots of drug and alcohol problems that possibly didn't emerge in this country until now, really. We're seeing the numbers kind of increasing now. But in America, they learnt the lessons from that conflict. And because of what people saw in combat out there, they often turned to substances when they returned to the US. And they set up very specific treatment models, and we've built a relationship with one of them, which is called Samaritan's Village. They have a project called Ed Thompson House, and we built a relationship with the staff there. And I've recently just won an award from the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, and they're going to finance me to go out and to look at what they do with the aim of bringing that back and influencing national policy in the UK.
But is it still the case that if soldiers, service personnel do fall on hard times, is that all that kind of thank you for your service stuff, all the flag waving, when they were in uniform, that's not available to them when they're out of uniform?
That's really what the men will say, absolutely, that they feel that when they went into the armed forces, they got a really strong structure and a strong family. But when their services were no longer required, when they came out and there was no appropriate transitional support for them, that actually fell apart and that they didn't know where to go for help and support, particularly with addiction or alcohol issues, because if they went back to their regimental association or they went back to their old commanders or they went back to their old friends, that actually they'd still be encouraged to go out drinking, have a pint, this'll be all right, cheer up, let's stiff up a lip, get a pint down, you'll be fine. When actually our experience is that that one will not be enough, and it'll be 5 days later before somebody emerges out of that drunken stupor.
So very briefly, you feel that the services themselves could be doing a heck of a lot more?
Absolutely. I do think now that the services are shifting their culture, there's definitely moves to do that. The MOD are supporting that, but they need to do that much quicker.
Jackie, we've got so much more to talk about, and we will rejoin you after the break. Welcome back. I'm Liam Fogarty, and today I'm meeting Jacquie Johnston-Lynch of Tom Harrison House, a new facility for ex-service personnel who have addiction issues. Tell us, Jacquie, where does your interest in this whole area of addiction come from?
I came from Kirkdale in Liverpool, and in the 80s it kind of really got flooded with brown powder heroin, really, and so there were lots of addiction issues in the area that I lived, and there was definitely lots of alcoholism issues. I also came from a family where there was a lot of addiction and alcoholism. My father was a regular heavy drinker and then engaged in domestic violence with my mum. So my kind of childhood was really kind of just soaked in alcohol, really. And me and my brother, who was 5 years younger than me, we kind of grew up in that until the age of 10. And then my mum and dad split up, and we just kind of grew up, and life was what it was. And my brother wasn't affected by addiction or alcoholism. He was probably the only one in our family who didn't have an addiction. But unfortunately, in 1992, he was killed by a drink driver. And when that guy's case came to court, we found that he had other previous offences. So I asked the police, what did you do to try and support this man? Because he's obviously done this a number of times. And they said, well, actually, our job was to punish him, not to support him. And it was in that moment that I thought, something has to be different here. We just can't keep seeing people who have drug and alcohol problems as monsters, of people who are doing the wrong thing and they need to be punished. They actually need to be helped and supported.
That is more than 20 years ago since your brother's death. Has society's attitude towards addicts and addiction changed, and has it changed for the better or for the worse?
I think probably because I'm in this bubble of addiction and recovery, I feel that it really has changed. I mean, I'm not sure maybe how many people outside of the world that I work in would feel that, but I definitely see that changing. And in Liverpool, before the Brink opened, we were number one for in the league table of alcohol-related admissions to hospital, and now we're down to number 11. So, I'm not saying that the Brink has changed that, but there's a cultural shift in Liverpool, that's for sure. And I think the City Council are really right behind us in developing that cultural shift. And
that's a change in, as it were, the authorities' approach, or is it a change among drinkers, ordinary people who maybe are looking at alcohol and drugs differently?
I think there's a bit of both, and I think there are key people, particularly in this city, who are influencing policy. Key people, particularly people who are in recovery. I think role models are the way forward. So people who model good quality recovery behaviour are the ones who kind of pass that down. You mentioned before about how significant grandparents are. Well, now we're seeing men and women who are clean and sober in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and kind of passing that down onto their grandchildren. In Liverpool, we only actually see new heroin patients come along. So people who are kind of addicted to heroin, the younger ones that are coming through are the grandchildren of their grandparents who were using and their children who were using, so the mum and dad were using. And so it's kind of intergenerational. So I think the quicker we break it down in families, in the system of the families, the quicker we'll break it down culturally throughout the city.
But that kind of support doesn't come cheap. We've all heard about austerity. Every kind of public service and health service is being affected by budget reductions or budget freezes. I suppose we have to say that. How difficult is it for you to support the organisations you're involved in?
I think it's my biggest bugbear, really. You know, often people say, oh, you must get really burnt out with that client group. And I say, actually, no. I love the work that I do. I love the team that I work in, love the guys that I work with. What I hate is the politics and the fighting for funding and the competition between services. That's what really would send me quite loopy. So I have to really stand up for what I believe in rather than fighting against all the time. I think if I was to fight against all the time, I just would be burnt out.
I suppose you're in a unique position, really, Jacquie, in having a kind of overview of how people in this city, in this region, maybe in this country, think about drugs and how they think about alcohol. Is the conversation that we're having as a society better informed, more intelligent, maybe less less about passing blame and condemning people? Are we changing that language that we talk about drugs and alcohol in?
Yeah, absolutely, because you're right that substance misuse services used to sit in criminal justice, and now for all its funding, and now it doesn't, it sits in public health. So it has become a public health issue, and as long as we can keep it high up on the public health agenda, we'll be fine. If we slip down, if we keep slipping down, it was Ebola a few months ago, we keep slipping down, it's obesity, it's heart disease. We have to keep making sure that substance misuse is right up there. And also I think it's really important that we take a non-clinical, non-medical approach and we look at communities, because that's where addiction took a stronghold. It's where recovery can take a stronghold, right? If we pass that through our communities.
But as you say, if you're inside this community of helpers and supporters, people in public health, you do use this language of a recovery, and it's always substance misuse, not abuse. You're not there to condemn. But don't you find that actually people outside your circle, your bubble if you like, still look at alcoholism, at drug addiction as evidence of a kind of moral failing, of a kind of weakness of character? Is that something you're up against?
I think we do see that a lot, but I think because of the field in which I work and I see the family members who we work with, I often challenge that. I will say that these people aren't people who are mad or bad. They're people who are not well, who need to be able to get support and to get themselves better so that they can engage in a better life, the life that they would really choose for themselves, because they certainly don't wake up one morning and say, I think I'll be an alkie. They do not do that.
But if you compare the way people talk about alcoholics, alkies, drug users, smackheads, potheads, whatever, and you compare that language with the rather more kind of enlightened approach to things like mental health now. People are much more supportive of people with mental health issues. Do you think that still your Cinderella services are still kind of in that awkward place where people are still very uncomfortable with notions of dependence and addiction?
I think you're right that absolutely people are uncomfortable with that, but it's our job now. It's our job to actually change that view. And I think that the real kind of community leaders that we see coming through now, people who are in recovery and really modelling great recovery behaviour, they're the people who can really influence those attitudes. They're the best people to do that.
And returning to the service personnel and these soldiers and service people who you'll be helping at Tom Harrison House, what do they have in common when they come to you?
First thing I'll say, which is really unusual, they take direction fantastically well. So straight away, it's amazing for us. We say, do this, and they do it, right? So that's really great. They have a feeling of wanting camaraderie, they want belonging and they want connection because they had all that in the armed forces. Now, that dovetails with the principles of recovery. Really, if I could write a prescription to cure addiction, it would be belonging, community, love, all of that kind of stuff really in there. And that's the stuff that they got in the armed forces. Maybe not so much love, but they felt it, you know. That might be just a little bit too woo-woo and out there for them, that. But absolutely, that they're trying to get all of that they had whilst they were in the armed forces back now. And that's the kind of stuff that we can offer them in the programme, but at the same time reintegrating into the mainstream services, because we don't want to just create more dependency on us for them.
But, you know, these guys are used to taking orders, carrying out instructions, working to a plan. Are you going to be able to use them as kind of ambassadors for the messages you're passing on, so that they'll go out and actually say, work for me, it could work for you?
Absolutely, and they're already doing that. There's some of our guys who are absolutely trailblazing recovery. Some of the early graduates, Paul is one of our first graduates, and he was pretty much living on the streets after 2 tours of Northern Ireland, and he'd been on the streets for about 12 years on and off. And now he is, 9 months clean and sober, and he is a real advocate, and he knows he's a trailblazer, so he's trying to ensure that the guys out there who he knows need help, that he is modelling that behaviour to them and putting that hand of support out. So he goes out to brothers and sisters out there, puts his hand out and tries to bring them into service.
You have these new premises, state-of-the-art premises up in Old Swan. We often read about kind of arguments between organisations like yours and, as it were, the host community, your neighbours, people in that part of Liverpool. Is that an issue for you?
No, our neighbours have been fantastic. Now, I don't know whether that's because we're veterans, so people have gone, oh, it's veterans, it's, you know, it's our men and women, you know, our boys and girls out there. There could be some of that attitude around it, but nonetheless, we've been massively supported in that area, and we've really, really appreciated the relationships we've been able to build with the neighbours there.
And if you could just have one message for people watching this programme who may know someone who has a problem with drugs, a problem with alcohol, what should they do?
Yeah, I think really if you know that someone's got a drug and alcohol problem, is just pick up the phone and ring Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous and just get the first entry into meeting other people. That's key.
Jacquie, it's been a pleasure to meet you. Good luck with your endeavours now and in the future. That's all from me. See you again soon.